My name is Erin. I'm 34 years old, and I'm standing in this courtroom watching my husband's face turn from smug confidence to pure terror. Just an hour ago, he looked me in the eyes and said those words that were meant to destroy me: "I'll take everything from you." But David didn't know about the 2 years of evidence I'd been collecting, the secrets I'd uncovered that would turn his threats into his own nightmare. Before I begin my story, where are you watching from today? Please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear how one woman's patience became her greatest weapon. Let me take you back 15 years to when I thought I'd found my Prince Charming. I first met David in 2009 at Preston and Associates, a prestigious law firm in Manhattan where I worked as a legal assistant. I was 23, fresh out of college with a degree in English literature, taking the legal assistant job to pay off student loans while figuring out my next move. David was 28, a junior associate with perfectly styled dark hair, designer suits, and a smile that made everyone in the office take notice. He came from old money in Connecticut, his father a federal judge, his mother from a banking dynasty. The first time we spoke was over a case file mix-up. I'd accidentally delivered the wrong documents to his office, and instead of the cold dismissal I expected from most lawyers there, he laughed and said, "Mistakes happen." He asked me to grab coffee to discuss how to fix it before the senior partners noticed. That coffee turned into lunch the next day, then dinner that weekend at Le Bernardin. David was everything I thought I wanted: sophisticated, ambitious, charming. He'd quote literature I loved, debate politics with passion, and painted a picture of a future so bright I couldn't help but be drawn to it. He pursued me with an intensity that felt like being chosen for something special. Flowers appeared on my desk, daily handwritten notes, quoting Neruda and Yeats, surprise tickets to Broadway shows I'd mentioned wanting to see. By Christmas that year, I was completely in love. He introduced me to his family at their estate in Greenwich, a mansion that looked like something from The Great Gatsby. His parents were cold at first, clearly questioning their son's choice of a middle-class girl from Ohio, but David stood by me, told them I was brilliant, that I grounded him, made him better. By New Year's Eve, when he proposed on the terrace of his Manhattan apartment overlooking Central Park, I said yes without hesitation. Our wedding in 2011 was a 300-person affair at his family's country club in the Hamptons. My parents, simple people who ran a hardware store in Columbus, looked overwhelmed among the senators, judges, and Wall Street executives. But David held my hand through it all, whispered that I was the only person in the room who mattered to him. During our vows, he promised to give me the world, to build an empire with me by his side. We moved to a 6-bedroom colonial in Westchester County, complete with a pool, tennis court, and gardens maintained by a full staff. David insisted I quit my job, said his wife. Shouldn't be fetching coffee for other lawyers when he was making enough to support us both in style. I resisted at first, but he painted a picture of me having time to write, to volunteer, to prepare for the family we'd planned. Eventually I agreed. Emma was born in October 2012, a beautiful baby with David's dark hair and my green eyes. David seemed overjoyed, taking 2 weeks off work, something unheard of for him. He'd hold Emma for hours, planning her future, talking about Harvard like it was already decided. When Noah arrived in December 2014, our family felt complete. David had just made partner, the youngest in the firm's history, and our Christmas card that year was the picture of perfection, matching red sweaters, genuine smiles, the tree towering behind us in our perfectly decorated living room. Those early years blur together now in a haze of birthday parties, school events, charity galas, and European vacations. I threw myself into being the perfect wife and mother. I was room parent at the kids' private school, organized fundraisers that raised 6 figures for various causes, hosted dinner parties for David's clients that were featured in local society pages. Our friends called us #CoupleGoals, said we'd ruined marriage for everyone else by setting the bar too high. David worked long hours but always made time for Sunday family dinners, coaching Noah's little league team, attending Emma's dance recitals. He'd still bring me flowers every Friday, take me to the city for shows and dinners at restaurants with month-long waiting lists. When he looked at me across those candlelit tables, I saw the same adoration from our early days. He'd tell me I was his anchor, his reason for everything. The house was always full of laughter then. Emma would put on elaborate plays in the living room, forcing us all to participate. Noah would build entire cities with his blocks, then explain their complex infrastructure with a seriousness that made David beam with pride. We had traditions pancakes every Saturday morning where David would make ridiculous shapes movie nights, where we'd build forts in the family room, annual trips to Disney, where David wore the mouse ears without complaint. I believed we had built something unbreakable, a foundation that could weather any storm. When friends went through divorces, David would pull me close and whisper, "That would never be us," that what we had was different, stronger. I believed him completely. The first crack in our perfect facade appeared in early 2019, so subtle I almost missed it. David started working late more frequently, which wasn't unusual during big cases, but these late nights had a different quality. He'd come home distracted, shower immediately, even if he'd showered at the gym, and his clothes sometimes carried a scent that wasn't his usual cologne. Phone calls began interrupting our dinner's urgent matters that required him to step outside for privacy. When I'd ask about them, he'd wave them off as difficult clients or demanding partners. His phone, which used to lie casually on counters, now never left his pocket and had acquired a passcode when it never had one before. The physical changes came next. David, who had always been fit but never obsessive about it, suddenly hired a personal trainer, sought an entirely new wardrobe of slimmer-cut suits, and started using a different cologne, something younger and more aggressive than his usual classic scent. He had his teeth whitened, started getting his hair cut every 2 weeks instead of monthly, and even considered Botox, though he laughed it off when I expressed surprise. His patience with the children began to fray. Emma's chattiness, which he used to find charming, now irritated him. Noah's requests to play catch were met with excuses about being tired or busy. Sunday family dinners became less sacred, often canceled for golf with clients or partners. When he was present, his mind wasn't. I'd catch him staring at his phone, smiling at messages he'd quickly close when I approached. June 2020 brought the first concrete evidence. I was doing laundry, checking pockets as always, when I found a receipt from the St. Regis Hotel lunch for two at the restaurant, $400 for a Wednesday afternoon, when he was supposedly in depositions. When I asked about it, he didn't miss a beat, said it was a client meeting that the partner had insisted on that venue. His explanation was smooth, reasonable, and I wanted so badly to believe it that I did. But the doubt had been planted. I started noticing things I'd previously overlooked, how he'd angle his laptop screen away from me, take his phone into the bathroom during showers, have sudden weekend work emergencies that required him to leave for hours. The man who used to share everything with me now had a whole life I couldn't access. When COVID hit and the world went into lockdown, I thought maybe we'd reconnect. But David convinced the firm he needed to work from the office for confidential client matters. While other families were forced together, mine grew further apart. I juggled remote learning for both kids, their anxiety about the pandemic, the house, everything, while David came home later and later, using the empty office as an excuse to avoid the chaos of our home. The criticism started slowly. Comments about how I'd let myself go during quarantine, though I looked exactly the same. Observations that other wives managed to keep their children quieter during work calls, though our kids were remarkably well behaved. Complaints about dinner choices, the state of his home office, the way I loaded the dishwasher. 20 things that had never bothered him in over a decade suddenly became intolerable. He started mentioning colleagues' wives, how Jennifer's wife had started a successful blog during lockdown, how Michael's wife managed to homeschool 3 kids while completing her PhD. The comparisons stung, especially since I was drowning trying to keep our family functional during a global crisis, while he disappeared into his convenient office escape. October 2020. Emma's 8th birthday became our breaking point. David had promised to be home by 4 for her small family party, just us, because of COVID restrictions. 4 became 5, became 7. Emma kept asking when Daddy would arrive. Her cake sitting uncut on the dining room table. When he finally walked through the door at 8:30, he was drunk, his shirt badly buttoned, red lipstick faintly visible on his collar despite an obvious attempt to wipe it away. Emma had fallen asleep on the couch waiting for him. When I confronted him quietly so as not to wake the children, he exploded. Called me pathetic, said I was imagining things because I had nothing else to do with my time. When I pointed out the lipstick, he laughed, said it was wine, that I was becoming paranoid and bitter, that maybe if I was more interesting, he wouldn't need to stay at the office so much. That night after he'd passed out in the guest room, I stood over Emma's bed watching her sleep, still wearing the party dress she'd picked specially for Daddy. I realized then that I wasn't just watching my marriage crumble, I was watching my children's innocence being chipped away. Noah had started having nightmares. Emma had become quiet and anxious, both walking on eggshells around their increasingly volatile father. The next morning, David acted like nothing had happened. He made elaborate apologies to Emma, took her to FAO Schwartz, and spent $2,000 on toys. But that night when I tried to talk about what was happening to us, he turned cold. Said maybe we needed space, that maybe I'd become too dependent on him, that successful men needed wives who motivated them, not dragged them down. The threat was subtle but clear. I had no income, no recent work experience, no family money. Everything we had was tied up in investments and accounts he controlled. The house was in his name, purchased before our marriage with his trust fund. Even my car was leased through his company. If he left, I'd have nothing, and we both knew it. The holidays that year were a performance. David played the perfect husband and father when his parents visited for Christmas, so convincing that his mother pulled me aside to say how lucky I was. After they left, he barely spoke to me for a week, treating me like hired help in my own home. I started sleeping in Emma's room, claiming she was having nightmares, though really, I couldn't bear lying next to someone who felt like a stranger. By January 2021, I was Googling divorce lawyers late at night, clearing my browser history like I was having an affair with the idea of freedom. But every consultation said the same thing: without proof of infidelity or abuse, with no income of my own, with his family's legal connections, I'd be lucky to get standard support and partial custody. David had been smart, making sure I was completely dependent, completely powerless. Or so he thought. November 3rd, 2020, the day after David's birthday party, where he'd spent the entire evening texting someone and barely noticed the effort I'd put into organizing it, I made a decision that changed everything. I withdrew $5,000 from my personal savings account, money I'd saved from birthday and Christmas gifts over the years, and hired a private investigator named Marcus Coleman. Marcus was a former NYPD detective who specialized in infidelity cases. He had a kind face but sharp eyes that missed nothing. When I sat in his office, hands shaking as I explained my suspicions, he didn't judge or console, just took notes and asked specific questions. Did David have patterns to his absence? Had I noticed unusual expenses? Could I provide his schedule and regular haunts? 3 weeks later, Marcus called me to his office. The manila folder he pushed across his desk contained my new reality. David was having an affair with Jessica Park, a 28-year-old senior associate at his firm. The photos were undeniable, them entering a boutique hotel in Tribeca, kissing in his car, her wearing the tennis bracelet I'd thought he'd bought for my upcoming birthday. But Jessica wasn't the beginning. Marcus had uncovered evidence of at least 2 previous affairs, one with a client's wife that had ended badly 18 months ago, another with a paralegal who'd suddenly left the firm with a generous severance package. David had a pattern, and I'd been too blind or too trusting to see it. The financial discoveries were even more shocking. David had been systematically moving money for the past 2 years. He'd created an LLC in Delaware that existed only on paper, funneling money through it to accounts in the Cayman Islands. More disturbing were the documents with my forged signature authorizing investments. I'd never agreed to loans against my jewelry that I'd never taken. Marcus connected me with a forensic accountant named Ruth Chen, who specialized in high net worth divorces. What Ruth uncovered made my blood run cold. David hadn't just been hiding money. He'd been preparing to leave me destitute. He'd taken loans against the house, liquidated the children's college funds, and replaced them with worthless investments in his shell company, even sold my grandmother's ring that I thought was in the safe deposit box and replaced it with a replica. The most damaging discovery came by accident. While investigating David's finances, Ruth found irregularities in his billing at the firm. Hours charged to clients who confirmed they'd never met with him, those days expensive dinners billed as client meetings when the clients were out of the country. Then Marcus found the smoking gun David had taken a $2 million bribe from a construction company to make a lawsuit disappear, depositing it in the Cayman account through a complex series of transfers. I sat with this information for weeks, feeling like I was carrying a bomb. My lawyer, Catherine Morrison, a friend from college who'd become a successful divorce attorney, advised me to wait. We needed to build an airtight case, she said. David had too many connections, too much money to fight back with. One wrong move and he'd bury me in legal fees before we even got to trial. So I became an actress in my own life. I smiled at dinner, asked about David's day, attended his firm's Christmas party, where Jessica wore a dress identical to one David had bought me years ago. I watched him lie with such ease it took my breath away, inventing conferences he attended while vacationing with Jessica, creating fictional client emergencies that required weekend attention. I documented everything. Every absence, every lie, every cruel comment recorded on my phone, hidden in my pocket. I took photos of documents he left in his study, forwarded emails from our joint account to a secret address, built a paper trail that would be undeniable. Emma and Noah became my motivation. Every time I wanted to confront him to scream the truth, I knew I thought of them needing stability, needing their mother to be strong and smart, not emotional and reactionary. Catherine had me open a bank account in just my name at a small credit union, depositing tiny amounts that wouldn't be noticed. She helped me apply for credit cards. To establish my own credit history, had me document every contribution I'd made to our household, every sacrifice for David's career. We were building my case for rehabilitation alimony for the house for primary custody. January brought an unexpected ally. Patricia Reeves, the wife of David's senior partner, called me for lunch. Over salads we barely touched, she told me everyone at the firm knew about Jessica, that it was an open secret. She also hinted that other partners were growing concerned about David's ethics, that there were rumors of financial impropriety. She gave me the name of David's former secretary, Angela, who'd left the firm abruptly the previous year. Angela's story was horrifying. David had sexually harassed her for months, making increasingly aggressive advances until she'd threatened to report him. The firm had paid her $100,000 for her silence and a non-disclosure agreement. But Angela had kept everything: emails, texts, recorded conversations, where David promised career advancement for personal favors. She was willing to testify if needed, NDA be damned, because she'd learned about 3 other women he'd done the same to. By February, I had enough evidence to destroy David 10 times over. But Catherine counseled patience. She was in contact with the FBI about the bribery, the IRS about tax evasion, the state bar about ethical violations. We were building something bigger than a divorce case. We were documenting a criminal enterprise. The pretense of normalcy was killing me slowly. Sitting across from David at dinner, knowing what I knew, watching him interact with our children like a loving father when I knew he'd stolen their futures. Emma had started asking why Mommy seemed sad, and Noah had begun acting out at school, sensing the tension. I told them Daddy was stressed about work, that everything would be better soon, promises I hoped I could keep. Valentine's Day was particularly cruel. David made a grand gesture of taking me to dinner at our special place, the restaurant where we'd had our first date. He held my hand, told me he knew he'd been distant, promised to do better. That night he made love to me for the first time in months, and I let him, needing to maintain the facade a little longer. I cried in the shower afterward, feeling like I'd betrayed myself, but Catherine had been clear any sudden change in my behavior could tip him off. 2 weeks later, I watched from my car as David met Jessica at a restaurant 6 blocks from our house, bold, in his certainty that I was too stupid or beaten down to catch him. They were laughing, her hand on his arm, wearing the watch I'd given him for our 10th anniversary. That night when he came home claiming to have been at the gym, I smiled and asked if he wanted dinner. He kissed my forehead and called me a good wife, and I bit my tongue until it bled. March 15th, 2021 started like any other Monday. David left for work early, kissing the kids goodbye with unusual affection. I should have known something was coming by the way he avoided my eyes, the nervous energy in his movements. At 10:30 that morning, while I was folding laundry and listening to Emma's virtual class from the next room, the doorbell rang. A process server stood on my porch with papers that felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. David had filed for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences. But this wasn't just a divorce filing, it was a declaration of war. He was seeking full custody of both children, claiming I was an unfit mother who contributed nothing to their upbringing. He wanted the house, both cars, and was arguing that I deserved no alimony since I was capable of working but chose not to. The accusations in his filing were breathtaking in their cruelty and dishonesty. He claimed I had a drinking problem, that I neglected the children's education, that I'd refused marital counseling he'd suggested. Every twisted version of our life designed to paint me as a parasite who'd trapped him in an unhappy marriage. My hands shook as I read his lawyer's signature, Robert Whitman, Jessica's father, and one of the most ruthless divorce attorneys in New York. I called Catherine immediately. She'd been expecting this, but not quite so soon. David had filed in New York County using his office address to establish jurisdiction, a tactical move to get a potentially more favorable venue. He'd also filed emergency motions to freeze our joint accounts, claiming he needed to protect marital assets from my supposed reckless spending. That afternoon, when David came to pick up the children for what he called a special dinner, he was a different person. Gone was any pretense of civility. He stood in my doorway, designer suit impeccable, and said with a smile that chilled me to my core, those words that would haunt him. "I'm going to take everything from you. The house, the kids, every penny. You'll be lucky if I let you see them on weekends. You should have stayed grateful for what you had." The children were confused when Daddy took them to stay at a hotel that night, telling them Mommy needed some space. Emma called me crying, asking what she'd done wrong. Noah wouldn't speak at all. David had fired the first shot, and he'd used our children as ammunition. What he didn't know was that I'd recorded his threat on my phone, hidden in my cardigan pocket, his arrogance making him careless about what he said and what he considered his house. The next weeks were psychological warfare. David used his connections to spread rumors in our social circle. Suddenly, friends stopped calling, Emma wasn't invited to classmates' birthday parties, and other mothers whispered when I picked up Noah from school. He'd convinced everyone that I'd been the problem, that he'd tried everything to save our marriage, that my mental health issues had forced his hand. He would bring Jessica when he picked up the children, introducing her as Daddy's friend who was helping during this difficult time. Emma told me Jessica had said she'd be their new mommy soon, that she'd make them happier than I ever could. The calculated cruelty of using my babies against me almost broke me, but Catherine kept reminding me to document everything, that his behavior would matter in court. The financial squeeze was immediate. With the joint accounts frozen, I had only the small amount I'd saved in my hidden account. David canceled my credit cards, had my car towed, claiming it was a corporate lease, even changed the locks on the house while I was at Catherine's office, though the police made him let me back in since it was still the marital residence. His lawyer sent threatening letters almost daily, demands for documentation. I supposedly had accusations of hiding assets I didn't possess, threats of pursuing criminal charges for imaginary financial crimes. The strategy was clear: bury me in legal fees and fear until I accepted whatever pittance they offered just to make it stop. David's public persona during this time was masterful. He posted on social media about the pain of divorce, how he was focusing on being the best father possible, inspirational quotes about rising above adversity. Friends who saw both our profiles would see him thriving while I'd gone silent, adding to his narrative that I was unstable and bitter. The first court hearing was scheduled for May 10th, a preliminary hearing for temporary support and custody arrangements. David strutted into the courthouse like he owned it, which in a way he did. The hallways were full of lawyers who knew him, judges who golfed at his country club, clerks who smiled at him with familiarity. He had Jessica there, sitting just behind the bar in a conservative suit that screamed respectability, while I sat alone, Catherine, my only ally, in a room full of his people. His legal team was 5 lawyers deep, each one specialized in a different aspect of family law. They painted a picture of me as a gold digger, who'd trapped a successful man, contributed nothing, and now wanted to cash out. They had exhibits of my supposed excessive spending, though the charges were all household expenses and children's needs. They argued I was college-educated and capable of earning my own living, that David shouldn't have to maintain me in luxury while he struggled. When they presented their proposed custody arrangement, giving me every other weekend and Wednesday dinners, I nearly screamed. They claimed the children were better off with David since he could provide stability, that I'd shown signs of depression that made me unpredictable, that my lack of employment showed an inability to provide proper structure and guidance. The judge, an older man who'd attended David's parents' anniversary party 2 years ago, seemed receptive to their arguments. He granted David temporary primary custody, ordered minimal support that wouldn't even cover groceries, and scheduled the full hearing for June 21st. David walked out of that courtroom victorious, pausing to tell me in passing that I should just give up now, save myself the embarrassment of losing everything publicly. That night in my empty house with my children at David's hotel, I sat on Emma's bed holding her favorite stuffed elephant and nearly gave up. Catherine found me there the next morning, having let herself in when I didn't answer her calls. She sat beside me, took my hands, and said something I'll never forget. "He's given us everything we need to destroy him. His arrogance is going to be his downfall. Trust me." She was right. Every threatening text, every violation of temporary orders, every lie he'd told in court filings we had proof to contradict. David thought he'd already won, and that overconfidence would be his undoing. June 21st arrived with the kind of perfect sunny weather that felt like mockery given what was about to unfold in the windowless courtroom. I'd barely slept for a week, going over every piece of evidence with Catherine, practicing my testimony, preparing for the character assassination that was sure to come. David had sent one final text the night before, last chance to settle. "Take the offer or lose everything." I walked into the courthouse at 8:45, wearing my mother's pearl necklace and the only designer dress David hadn't taken, a navy shift that made me look serious but not severe. Catherine had coached me on every detail, minimal makeup, wedding ring still on, to show I'd tried to save the marriage photos of the children in my folder where the judge could see them. David arrived in a convoy of black SUVs, his legal team emerging like a small army. Jessica was there again, this time in the front row of the gallery, wearing a diamond necklace I recognized as one David had supposedly bought for his mother's birthday. His parents flanked her, his mother's disapproving gaze fixed on me as if I'd personally wronged her by existing. The courtroom filled with David's colleagues, our former friends, all mysteriously aligned with him, and several reporters who'd been tipped off about the high-profile divorce. My side had only Catherine, my sister, who'd flown in from Ohio, and surprisingly Patricia Reeves, who gave me a subtle nod of support. Judge Patricia Hendricks presiding was our first victory. She'd been assigned after the original judge recused himself, and she had a reputation for fairness and particularly harsh views on financial manipulation in divorces. David's team immediately moved for her recusal, claiming bias, but she dismissed it with barely concealed irritation. David's testimony came first. He painted himself as the long-suffering husband who'd given me everything while I contributed nothing. He claimed I'd refused to work despite his encouragement, that I'd become obsessed with social status, spending recklessly on charity galas and designer clothes while he worked 100-hour weeks. He actually teared up when describing how I'd allegedly turned the children against him, claiming Emma had told him I said Daddy didn't love them anymore. His lawyer presented their evidence credit card statements, showing purchases at high-end stores, photos from charity events I'd organized, a household budget that seemed excessive without context. They brought in a vocational expert who testified I could easily earn $70,000 a year with my degree, that my refusal to work was a choice, not a sacrifice. When they rested their case, David was practically glowing. His team had presented me exactly as planned, a lazy, vindictive woman trying to cash in on a successful man's hard work. Several people in the gallery were nodding along, buying every word. Jessica actually smiled at me, a pitying smile like she'd already won. Then Catherine stood up. She started quietly, almost conversationally. She submitted a single photograph into evidence: David and Jessica at the Bahamas resort, dated 6 months before our separation, when David had supposedly been at a legal conference in Boston. David's lawyer objected, calling it irrelevant to financial matters, but Judge Hendricks overruled him, stating that credibility was always relevant. The next 2 hours were surgical in their precision. Catherine presented the timeline of David's affairs with timestamps from hotel keycards, credit card records from the joint account showing jewelry purchases that never came to me, flight records for trips with Jessica while I was told he was working. She had affidavits from 3 former employees of David's firm, each describing inappropriate behavior they'd witnessed. When she presented the forged signatures on financial documents, David's lawyer tried to argue, "I must have forgotten signing them." Catherine produced the originals from our safe deposit box that David didn't know I had copies of, then the forensic handwriting expert, who detailed exactly how the signatures had been traced from other documents. The judge's expression shifted from neutral to concerned. The financial evidence was devastating. Catherine walked through each transaction, showing how David had systematically drained our assets while creating the paper trail that made it look like excessive spending on my part. The charity gala expenses he'd complained about. They were events his firm had asked me to organize, using our personal cards for reimbursable expenses that went back to the company. Then Catherine called her first witness, Marcus Coleman. The private investigator's testimony was clinical and damaging. He presented photographs, recordings of David discussing hiding assets with someone on the phone, even video of David meeting with a banker in the Cayman Islands when he was supposedly at a partner's retreat in Vermont. Angela testified next despite the NDA. She described David's harassment in painful detail, producing emails where he'd explicitly threatened her job if she didn't comply with his advances. She'd kept a journal documenting each incident with dates and times that corresponded with David's calendar. By the time she finished, several women in the gallery were crying. The FBI agent's appearance was when David's composure finally cracked. Agent Sarah Thompson testified that they'd been investigating David for 6 months based on evidence provided by an unnamed source, me through Catherine. She detailed the bribe from Brennan Construction, complete with wire transfer records and recorded conversations between David and Brennan's CEO discussing the quid pro quo. David's face went from red to white to gray. His lead attorney requested a recess, which the judge granted. During the break, I watched David's team huddle frantically, Jessica no longer sitting with his parents, but standing alone in the hallway typing furiously on her phone. His mother approached me hissing that I was destroying her son, but Patricia Reeves intercepted her, suggesting she might want to reconsider her loyalties given what was being revealed. When court resumed, David's lawyer tried damage control, arguing the financial allegations were separate from the divorce proceedings, that the FBI investigation was ongoing and unproven. He suggested I'd orchestrated everything as revenge for David's infidelity, that I'd known about the affairs for years and planned this ambush. Then Catherine played her ace. She called David back to the stand, asking him to confirm his earlier testimony that I'd contributed nothing to our marriage or his career. David, rattled but still arrogant, doubled down. I was a trophy wife, he said, someone who'd added no value beyond decoration. Catherine presented 14 years of evidence to the contrary. Every dinner party I'd organized that led to new clients documented with thank you notes from partners crediting those events with millions in new business. The connections I'd made through charity work that had brought David's firm prestigious accounts. The presentation I'd designed for his partnership bid because he'd been too overwhelmed to do it himself, the one that had secured his promotion. She had emails from David to colleagues over the years praising my contributions, calling me his secret weapon, crediting me with his success. One particularly damning message to his mentor said he'd never have made partner without my strategic thinking and social connections. Another admitted that my leaving my career was the sacrifice that had enabled his rise. The final blow came when Catherine revealed that Jessica's father, David's lawyer, Robert Whitman, had been receiving payments from David's Cayman account. It wasn't just legal fees. It was a bribe to ensure favorable treatment, maybe even to influence Jessica to participate in the relationship as a way to protect David's assets. The judge immediately reported this to the state bar and declared a mistrial for David's entire legal team's conduct. David tried to speak to explain or deny, but his own lawyer advised him to remain silent given the FBI presence. Jessica had fled the courtroom. His parents left without a word. By 4 o'clock, David sat alone at his table. His entire house of cards collapsed around him. The judge's preliminary ruling was swift and harsh. She granted me an emergency order of protection for the asset's exclusive use of the marital home and temporary full custody, with supervised visitation for David pending the criminal investigation. She ordered a full forensic accounting of all assets, including those hidden offshore, and indicated that David's financial misconduct would heavily influence the final settlement. As we left the courthouse, David was served with an arrest warrant. The FBI had decided they had enough to charge him with bribery, tax evasion, and wire fraud. The image of him being handcuffed in his $10,000 suit, while photographers captured every moment, was on the evening news and the front page of 3 newspapers the next morning. That night, I tucked Emma and Noah into their own beds for the first time in months. Emma asked if Daddy was in trouble, and I told her the truth in simple terms. Daddy had made some bad choices, but it wasn't their fault, and both Mommy and Daddy loved them no matter what. Noah, finally feeling safe enough to speak, whispered that he was glad we were home. So was I. The aftermath of June 21st unfolded like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. Within 24 hours, Preston and Associates announced David's termination for cause, citing violation of the firm's ethics policies and potential criminal liability. They issued a statement distancing themselves from his actions and pledging full cooperation with authorities. His corner office was cleaned out while he sat in federal custody awaiting his arraignment. Jessica Park's story became tabloid fodder when it emerged that she'd been cooperating with the FBI for 3 months, trying to save herself from conspiracy charges. She claimed David had coerced her into the relationship with promises of partnership and threats to her career. Her father, Robert Whitman, was suspended from practicing law, pending investigation into the bribery allegations. The mighty Whitman family law dynasty crumbled overnight. David's bail was set at $2 million, which his parents refused to pay after learning the full extent of his crimes. He spent 3 weeks in federal detention before his brother finally posted bond with conditions including surrendering his passport and wearing an ankle monitor. The man who'd promised to take everything from me was now confined to a studio apartment in Queens, his assets frozen by federal order. The final divorce hearing in September was anticlimactic. David's new lawyer, a public defender since he could no longer afford private counsel, didn't contest our terms. The settlement was beyond what I'd ever imagined. I received 70% of all verified assets. The house free and clear, full custody, with David getting supervised visitation once he completed court-mandated therapy and alimony of $15,000 per month until remarriage or retirement age. The judge also ordered David to pay my legal fees, all back support, and establish new college funds for both children to replace what he'd stolen. The offshore accounts once recovered by federal authorities would be split according to the divorce decree after fines and restitution were paid. In trying to leave me with nothing, David had engineered his own financial ruin. His criminal trial began in November. I testified for the prosecution detailing the financial manipulation and forgeries. The evidence was overwhelming: documented bribes, tax evasion spanning 5 years, and wire fraud related to the offshore transfers. David's defense attempted to paint him as a man driven to extremes by a failing marriage, but the jury didn't buy it. On December 3, 2021, David was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, 3 years supervised release, and ordered to pay $6 million in restitution and fines. The judge called his betrayal of fiduciary duty particularly egregious given his position as an officer of the court. His law license was permanently revoked, ensuring he could never practice again. His parents, humiliated by the public scandal, sold their Greenwich estate and moved to their property in Switzerland. They sent Christmas gifts for the children, but made no attempt to see them or maintain contact with me. The family that had once looked down on me as not good enough now couldn't distance themselves fast enough from their own son. Emma and Noah struggled initially with their father's absence and the truth about what he'd done. I found them an excellent therapist who specialized in helping children process parental betrayal. Emma, always the more resilient one, adapted quickly, throwing herself into dance and academics. Noah took longer, his trust shattered by the father he'd idolized, but slowly began to open up through art therapy and return to his normal, cheerful self. I went back to school in January 2022, enrolling in law school at Fordham. The same skills I'd used to document David's crimes served me well in legal research and writing. My professors, aware of my story, became mentors, and I found my calling in family law, specifically helping women navigate high-conflict divorces with financial abuse components. By 2023, I'd graduated with honors and passed the bar on my first attempt. I opened my own practice specializing in forensic divorce work, partnering with Catherine, who'd become not just my lawyer but my closest friend. Our firm, Morrison and Sanders, quickly gained a reputation for taking on powerful men who thought they could manipulate the system. The book I wrote about my experience from trophy wife to truth warrior became a bestseller, resonating with thousands of women who'd faced similar situations. The advance in royalties not only secured my financial independence, but funded a nonprofit providing free legal consultation to women in abusive marriages who couldn't afford representation. Speaking engagements followed, law schools inviting me to lecture on financial abuse in marriage bar associations, requesting seminars on uncovering hidden assets. What David had meant to be my destruction became my platform for helping others. Every woman who left my office empowered to fight back was a victory David never saw coming. Love wasn't on my agenda, but it found me anyway in 2024. James Matthews, a widowed English professor at Columbia, came to one of my book signings. His quiet intelligence and genuine kindness were so different from David's flashy charm. He didn't promise me the world. He offered partnership, respect, and authentic connection. When he proposed a year later with his grandmother's simple sapphire ring, I said yes to a future built on truth rather than illusion. Emma, now 13 and fiercely protective of me, grilled James extensively before giving her approval. Noah, 11, and finally trusting again, asked if he could call James Dad someday. We married in a small ceremony in our backyard, surrounded by the real friends who'd emerged after the fair weather ones disappeared. Catherine was my maid of honor, my sister officiated, and my children walked me down the aisle. David was released early in 2025 for good behavior, having served 3 years. He sent a letter through his lawyer requesting to see the children. They're old enough now to decide for themselves, and both chose to meet him once supervised to get closure. Emma told him she pitied him for choosing greed over family. Noah simply said he had a new dad now who actually showed up. David left that meeting in tears, finally understanding what taking everything really meant. Standing here now in my office overlooking Central Park, I can hardly recognize the woman who once believed her worth was tied to being David's wife. The framed photo on my desk shows Emma at 16, confident and brilliant, headed to Yale in the fall, and Noah at 14, kind and artistic, thriving at LaGuardia High School. James sends me silly texts throughout the day, reminders that love doesn't have to be a performance. The journey from that courtroom where David promised to take everything from me to this moment of absolute freedom wasn't just about winning a divorce or seeing justice served. It was about discovering that what I thought was everything, the marriage, the lifestyle, the identity as the perfect wife, was actually a prison I'd helped build around myself. David's betrayal, as devastating as it was, became my liberation. I think about the women who come to my office shaking like I once did, convinced they have no options, no power, no value beyond what their husbands have assigned them. I see myself in their eyes, and I get to be what I needed but didn't have in those dark early days, proof that survival is possible, that justice exists, that starting over at 34 or 44 or 64 isn't an ending but a beginning. The money from the settlement and my successful practice means I'll never be financially vulnerable again, but that's not the real victory. The triumph is in Emma's laughter, Noah's trust, James's partnership, and my own voice that no longer needs anyone's permission to speak. It's in the 117 women my firm has helped escape abusive marriages, the $3 million raised by our nonprofit, the laws I've helped draft protecting financial abuse victims. Sometimes I get updates about David through the legal community grapevine. He works as a paralegal now at a small firm in New Jersey, living in a one-bedroom apartment driving a 2010 Honda. Jessica married a hedge fund manager and pretends their relationship never happened. His parents never returned from Switzerland. The empire he was so proud of building exists only in the federal court records of his conviction. There's no satisfaction in his downfall, only a sense of cosmic balance. He wanted to take everything from me, and in trying, he lost everything that actually mattered. The irony is that if he'd been honest, asked for a divorce respectfully, been a decent father, he'd still have his career, his reputation, his children's love, and half of our considerable assets. Greed and cruelty cost him more than generosity ever would have. The lesson I carry forward and share with every client is this: when someone shows you who they are through their actions, believe them the first time. But more importantly, never let anyone convince you that your worth is determined by what they're willing to give you. I spent 13 years believing David's version of my value, accepting the identity he assigned me, grateful for the life he allowed me to live. Now I know the truth. I was never the trophy wife he claimed I was in court. I was the foundation that allowed him to build his castle, the strategist behind his success, the one who created a home worth coming back to. When he destroyed our marriage trying to destroy me, he revealed that I was always the strong one. I just needed the right catalyst to remember it. The door opens and my 2 o'clock appointment walks in, another woman with that familiar look of someone whose world has just shattered. I smile warmly, remembering Catherine's kindness when I sat where she's sitting. I tell her what I tell all of them: you're stronger than you know, this isn't your ending, and we're going to get through this together. As she begins her story, I think one final thought about David. Something I'd tell him if he could hear it. You said you'd take everything from me, but you gave me something instead: my freedom, my purpose, my true self. The divorce you thought would be my nightmare became my awakening. And for that, in the strangest way, I'm grateful. What would you do if someone you trusted tried to destroy you? Have you ever found strength you didn't know you had? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life stories of triumph over betrayal. Share this with someone who needs to hear that there's hope after heartbreak, that justice is possible, and that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out who you really are. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your worth was never theirs to determine. Stay strong.